Doesn't really sound like anyone is straying from the script here, but I have to wonder if that's true behind the scenes, away from the cameras as well. What are you hearing about whether or not any real progress is happening in the background?
It's early to tell if there's progress happening in the background. I think maybe the bad news is nobody seems to agree fully on whether those staff-level conversations are actually about the debt limit. The Republicans came out and said we're going to have staff-level conversations, we're going to meet again Friday on the debt limit. Democrats, including Senator Schumer, said, well, we're going to talk about the budget process and appropriations bills, but we're not going to let the Republicans tie those two together. If they could find common ground on spending priorities, is it really that hard for Democrats to fold that into a debt limit vote? Right now, they say yes. I asked Senator Brian Schatz, who's one of the appropriators who writes those bills, are you going to find common ground on spending caps? To be honest, he laughed at some of the reporters who even asked. They are very determined that they're not going to tie them together, but at least they are talking about spending cuts or wherever they can find common ground.
This is quite a bit of showbiz here. First of all, it would be easier, I think, to say who Kailey did not talk to today on Capitol Hill. So great job assembling all of these voices. I guess the question I have is, should we believe any of them? Because there's a party line here that appears to be on both sides galvanizing with time. Even as we actually find some cracks, there's some reason for optimism as we walk up to a meeting on Friday. Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I think that, at this stage of the game, we're still a couple weeks out, which in Congress time is nowhere near a deadline. They're worse on deadlines than journalists are. So, they have time to strike a deal, but whether they can strike a deal on spending, which is what Republicans would want, is that seems far-fetched to me given the time constraints. You have to go sort of program by program, and when we saw this play out a dozen years ago, the spending and the debt limit were linked, and it took a long time to hatch a deal. The progress that we saw on Friday was agreeing to continue talking, which I think was, or not on Friday, yesterday, and to meet again on Friday. I think that was probably the best progress we could hope for, and now staff are trying to work behind the scenes to figure out where their bosses might be able to forge some kind of compromise.
Well, the boss at the White House, Joe, is also not just sitting around while the staff talk. He's taking his message upstate in New York, speaking from Hudson earlier today about this. Take a listen.
Here's what's happened if MAGA Republicans get their way. American defaults on our debt, higher interest rates for credit cards, car loans, mortgages, payments for Social Security, Medicare, our troops, veterans could all be halted or delayed. Our economy would fall into recession, and our international reputation would be damaged in the extreme.
And I guess I should have said Valhalla, but in the Hudson Valley. You take a girl out of New York after 3 months and she forgets geography. But Megan, on this point where he's talking about how it would be a problem not just for the U.S. but for the world, it is a question of where the blame falls, on whose shoulders. Republicans and Democrats both still seem pretty convinced at this point that it will be the other party that takes the blame, which maybe is why neither is willing to blink.
Well, traditionally, the president is who usually gets the blame when the economy does nosedive. In this instance, though, because we're watching politics, like the messy progress of policymaking play out in real time, I think that they both are going to share the blame here. Kevin McCarthy doesn't want a default, but Kevin McCarthy also doesn't want to lose his speakership. So he's going to have to decide how much of a leash he has to negotiate with the president and with congressional Democrats to forge some kind of deal that doesn't put him, against conservatives in his party.
I want to come back to the idea of a short-term solution here, Jack, because both sides said before the meeting yesterday they were not interested in that. McCarthy says we're not extending the debt ceiling or suspending it till September 30, and the White House says we're not making a plan for that either. But the president did allow for that opportunity when he was talking with reporters following the meeting. He also acknowledged the 14th Amendment, as a matter of fact. But with regard to a short-term solution, Bloomberg Intelligence is writing today that that is the most likely outcome at this point. Do you see it that way?
It is very hard to tell. You don't have people spelling out their reliance on emergency measures, a short-term stopgap or the 14th Amendment argument or that, anything like that, until it's actually necessary. We still don't really know when the deadline is. It could be as early as early June. It could be as late as early August. As the time frame narrows and the experts watch the pace of spending and revenue, it's possible that they will very suddenly realize that the debt limit deadline is upon them, and people who didn't want a short-term extension might be forced to rely on one. It's a very unpredictable situation, especially because that so-called X date, there's about a 2-month range of where it could be, and they are having a lot of trouble narrowing that down.
Speaking of unpredictable situations, Joe, it seems like none of us could ever anticipate or predict what the next headline was going to be that crossed regarding Congressman George Santos. But we know today he was indicted on 13 counts by the Justice Department, pleaded not guilty to all of those, said he's going to fight the fight and isn't going to resign. It does raise, though, a question for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. This was something that was raised by Democratic Congressman Jerry Connolly of Virginia when I spoke with him earlier.
It is an enormous stain on the institution and, frankly, on Kevin McCarthy's leadership that he kept him as long as he did because he needed his vote to be Speaker.
Megan, how does the House Speaker handle this? What is he likely to do while the justice system works its way through this?
Well, it's not unusual for a sitting House member or senator, for that matter, to be indicted and to continue in office. And McCarthy needs every vote he can get. Remember, he got his budget deal through. He squeaked it through with just 2 additional votes, 217 to 215. He loses Santos and he loses a vote. And that's how he sees it right now. McCarthy has said that he would request Santos resign, not demand he resign, if he were convicted. So that's a long time from now and could push us until well past the election. You know, there was a member, Jim Traficant, some of you may recall, from Ohio, known for his flamboyant sense of style and his flair on the floor. And he was expelled. He was the last member who was actually expelled, but that didn't actually happen until 3 months after he was convicted.
So all that said here, I heard a lot of talk about we're going to let the legal process work its way out. Republican leaders in the House held a news conference earlier today. Jack, we heard from Elise Stefanik, Steve Scalise. Let the legal process run its course. He already stepped down from his committee. That's all we're going to see, right? It's going to be the voters that have to fire him if anyone does.
I mean, if he gets convicted, you see how many members want to vote to expel him. McCarthy has said that if he's convicted, he would ask him to resign. That is different than voting to expel him. Until that happens, you know, George Santos has made it clear how important his vote is, as we saw in that debt limit vote where he waited until the very end to cast the last vote. They're not in much of a position to take the high road and have leadership kick him out before it's absolutely necessary. So they've given him a pretty long leash.